Hello and welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to Frances Quinn. Her new novel is The Lost Passenger. It's her third in a writing career that has seen her put words in unexpected places. You can hear why she leans on advice from one of the greatest bands of all time to keep her writing.
A lesson from ABBA. So when Benny Andersson wrote his first song, not for ABBA, but in his early solo career, and it did quite well, and he thought, well, if I can write one, I can write two, and if I can write two, I can probably write three or four. And I remind myself of that. You know, when you think, I've been in this place before, I've thought a book was never going to work, and I have made it work. So that is a big thing. I think we all do that. You think, yeah, I've done it once, and my husband's always saying to me, I say, oh God, this one's never going to work. And he says, you have said that before. You said exactly that before. And that does help. That definitely helps. You have to remind yourself of that.
Also, Frances is open about wanting success and what she's trying to write to make that happen.
If you want to be reasonably big and make a living from writing, you need to not only sell in this country, you need to sell in other countries, you need to sell in translation, and ideally you want to sell in America. And I didn't get even a sniff of an American deal or a translation deal for the first two books. And I thought, well, why is that? Because people seem to like them. So the first one, the background is the English Civil War. Well, lots of people in Britain don't know about the English Civil War, let alone anywhere else. So that was never going to fly abroad. And then the second one, I don't really know. I mean, it was Georgian England. That sometimes sells, sometimes doesn't. But what I was told is, yeah, it's probably too niche. So then I thought, well, okay, if you want an American deal, if you want foreign deals, you need to think about what those markets want.
You can find out what she did next in this week's Writer's Routine with Frances Quinn. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name is Dan Simpson. Thank you for being there. This is Writer's Routine, where we take a look inside an author's working day. We see what they do, how and where they do it. How do they give themselves the best chance of making time for their creativity to get words on the page and the page, hopefully, onto the shelves. This week, we're with Frances Quinn. Frances started writing as a journalist, working for Woman's Weekly, Ideal Home, Good Housekeeping. She then branched into copywriting, and we discuss why, even if you've never read one of her books, there's a high chance that you've read her writing, at least if you shop at Waitrose. Now, in 2013, Frances won a place on the Curtis Brown Creative Novel Writing course, and that led through a meandering path to her debut called The Smallest Man, published back in 2021. Her new novel is The Lost Passenger. It's all about Elinor Coombes, who boards the Titanic with her family, trapped in an unhappy, aristocratic marriage to a cold and controlling husband. And then, well, the ship goes down, we know that much. And Elinor realises the disaster has given her a chance to take her son and start a new life, but only if they can disappear completely. It's a brilliant pitch, and she'd never even seen the film. We talk about why she's a very whiny, moany writer, also how she's learning about a character, having already decided what they'll do. We talk about why it's a privilege to have an editor, and we should never forget that. And so much more. Now, if you get a chance and you'd like to take a peek behind the curtain of the show for updates, for little foods for thought and see what's happening, do follow the Writer's Routine Substack for a more or less weekly newsletter. I'm a little behind. It's been busy. I will update that really soon, I promise. You can find the link in the episode notes or wherever you're listening. And we'll get into it with Frances Quinn. And we start, as we always do, with what she sees around her in the place where she sits down to write.
So I'm very lucky that I do have my own office. I have worked from home for a long time before I was writing books. So I have my own office, and it's very white and wooden, and because I'm a big fan of everything Scandi, so it's all very IKEA. And I have above my desk, I have what I call my motivation board, which I've had ever since I started trying to write a novel. And it's things that I look at when I feel a bit like, oh, this is never going to work, or I'm getting stuck. And it's interesting because when I was writing my first novel, which of course you write on spec. You have no idea whether it's ever going to get published. So motivation is quite a big issue. And in those days, my motivation board was covered with pictures of the life I imagined I was going to have when I was a published writer. So it had, I think it had a lovely picture of a Swedish beach house, and there were restaurants I wanted to go to and places I thought I would be jetting off to. And over the years, those things have disappeared and they've been replaced by, I've quite a lot of, I'm looking at it now, I've got quite a lot of clips from interviews with big name authors talking about how difficult writing can be and how, you know, they might have struggled through their books, but that they come right. And they're the things that I look at when I'm thinking, oh no, this book's never going to work. And then I think, well, if Camilla Leckberg made it work or Jessie Burton made it work, it can work. So I look at that quite often. And then I also, again, when I was starting off, I read The Artist's Way by, I think it's Julia Cameron. It's a very well-known book on sort of creativity. And I'll be honest, it's a bit woo-woo for me. But there was one thing in it that she said, you have to, if you want to be creative, you have to entertain your inner child. And your inner child likes sparkly things. And I do like sparkly things and kind of fun things. So I always have a shelf that has what my husband calls my creatures on it. So there's a doll we picked up in a French market whose head is shaped like an aubergine. There's a little China model of Agneta from ABBA. There's a New Zealand hula doll, all sorts of just fun, silly things. But they all come from times when I was either having a happy time or in some way I was feeling good about myself. So again, you know, when I feel a bit stuck and a bit unmotivated, I look at the creatures. And then I also have bookshelves on 3 sides of the room, lots of books. And my favourite shelves are the ones that have got author friends books. Because again, one of the things that I have really loved about this whole journey, if I can use that word, is making friends with lots of other authors, going to their book launches, or sometimes following their book through the whole journey, and then there it is sitting on my bookshelf. And again, that's a reminder that, you know, what is in my head at the moment will one day be a book.
So there's a lot of inspiration around you, from the little doll of Agneta from ABBA and kind of the motivational pinboard. Is there anything nearby that more reminds you what you're there to do that day while you're writing? So specific things for your book. I know that for The Lost Passenger, we'll talk about this a bit more in a sec, but there was a lot of research about the Titanic. Will I find that all around? Yeah,
so directly to the left of me is a bookshelf that has all my research books. So there's a shelf for The Smallest Man, my first book. There's a shelf for That Bonesetter Woman, my second book, and there's an absolutely crammed shelf for the Lost Passenger. And it seems like with every book that I write, I seem to need a third, again, as many research books. So yeah, there are lots and lots of those. And there are notebooks. I try to, I have a sort of method of working where, again, this is inspired by ABBA, as is quite a lot of what I do. So I don't know if you know, but Bjorn and Benny couldn't write musical notation. So when they were composing, they would never write down their tunes. They would just sort of noodle around on the piano and the guitar. And if a melody stuck in their head, they knew it was something to work on. And my version of that is when I'm planning, I write by hand because it just seems to help me think, but I never look at those notes. So it is very much, I might have written it down because that clarifies it while I'm thinking about it, but I don't go back and look because if I need to remind myself, it probably wasn't that good an idea. So there's a notebook that I write in, but then never look at again.
You're talking about these research books that you've got and how the list of what you need seems to grow with every novel that you do. Why do you think that is? Is that because you're getting better at researching, so you're kind of spreading your net further? Or is it maybe you're just taking on a bigger challenge with every book that you write, and the next one needs more books to read and research with because there's much grander scope with it?
Yeah, I think it can be that. I think sometimes it's just the book. So, for example, with The Lost Passenger, the story begins in Edwardian England. I mean, think Downton Abbey, but the aristocrats are not nearly as nice. And then we have the middle section on the Titanic, and then the final section, she's living in the tenements of New York. So I had 3 different worlds to research, really. So I think that's partly why. But also you get into, you can get very niche. So with That Bonesetter Woman, I needed to know about bone setting. The sister of the main character was an actress, so I needed to know about Georgian theatre. Their aunt was a confectioner. And so you go down these little rabbit holes, and you quite often think, oh, I just need to know that one thing. And then you search around on Amazon, and there's the one book that you think that's going to have the answer. And then you wait with bated breath for it to come, and it doesn't have the answer. So I have got quite a lot of books that turned out to be failures, but I still keep them because when I look at them, it kind of reminds me of writing that book, which is always a pleasure looking back. It's not always a pleasure while I'm in the middle of it. I'm a very whiny, moany writer, I'm afraid. I'm not one of those people that gets great joy from writing.
Well, yeah, I've been thinking about this a bit recently. Are people, like, do a lot of people want to want to write, or do they want to be a writer? And you mentioned at the start with your initial motivation board before you had even got anything published, and it was all about the lifestyle that you imagined having a writer would be. So there must have been and I know that you've surrounded yourself with words throughout your career, really. But it seems like you had there was a moment where you thought, okay, I want to be a writer. What do you remember about taking that decision to almost step away from writing for magazines and writing advertising to then thinking, okay, I need to be a novel writer now? What made you make that leap?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know if it was ever as sudden as that. So I mean, I'm like most writers, I'm a big reader and always have been. I could read before I went to school. I devoured books as a kid. And so I can't really remember a time when I didn't want to write them. So I wrote my first book when I was about 7, which was plagiaristically entitled The Adventures of Squirrel Nutkin, Apologies to Beatrix Potter. And I always wanted to do it, but I think because then I did become a journalist and I was writing words, maybe that scratched the itch for a long time. And then, life is busy, you work and so on. And I suppose about probably 25 years ago, I went freelance. So I wasn't having to commute to London. I wasn't having to be in an office 5 days a week. And I thought, okay, this is my chance. And I think I probably wrote 2 full-length first drafts of completely different novels. So it was kind of gradual. I really wanted to do it. And then I think I saw an advert for the Curtis Brown writing course, and you had to get picked to be on it, but you also had to pay for it. And I was working on this book and I wasn't really sure if I was going to make it work. And I thought, you know what, if I apply for that, and so you had to send, I think, 1,000 words and an outline of your idea. And I thought, well, if they pick me, I don't want to do the course, but I'll know whether this story is worth carrying on with. And they did pick me. And then, of course, I was flattered. So I did take the course. And then I was kind of in, and I got my agent at the end of that course. And I mean, that's gold to get your agent before you've even finished your book. So I was not going to stop then. I had to kind of carry on. So it sort of happened gradually. And I never really did step away from the other career. I mean, I still do write a bit for magazines. I still do copywriting. And I quite like that balance, really.
There's a few questions that comes from the course, because, as you say, you've read voraciously since you were very young. You've always written in one way or another, and you worked on these 2 novels. What did the course kind of teach you? I get, you can't go through a 3-month-long course in one podcast, but like, what did it make you think differently about novel writing that maybe you wouldn't have got to on your own?
I think it wasn't really things about technique, because although I did learn things about technique, you can learn them from books, you can learn them from podcasts. the big thing I think that shifted for me is we would meet 15 of us once or twice a week. It was in the days when you could get online courses, in-person courses. I think they're often online now. And I would look around that room and think, okay, most of these, with a couple of exceptions, most of these people are sane and they think they can do this. So it's obviously doable. So why shouldn't I do it? And I think it was that kind of switched it on for me, that this wasn't something only special people could do, that if you applied yourself, you could do it. And I think one of the things I did learn is, yeah, you do have to have some talent for writing, but what you really, really need is the stickability to keep going when it gets hard, to keep going through rejections. That is perhaps 50% of what makes the difference between someone who wants to be a writer and someone who actually gets there.
There's still a little bit of time, isn't there? Because I think you get on the course in like 2013 and then your debut isn't published 8 years later. So did that feel natural at the time, that it was just taking a little while? Were you sending it out loads and it just was getting rejected again and again? Like, just try and run us through that moment.
Yeah, so I don't really have that classic rejection story, luckily for me. So basically, The Smallest Man is based on a true story of the boy with dwarfism who was given to Queen Henrietta Maria as a sort of human pet. And when I first came across the story, I thought, oh my God, how has nobody turned this into a novel? This is gold. And then when I started working on it, I realised that actually true life doesn't always make a good novel because it doesn't really have the shape of a novel. And I can remember halfway through the course, a classmate saying, how's it going? And I said, I'm ditching this book when we get to the end of the course because they keep saying it has to have this certain shape and I can't make this story into that shape. But then at the end of the course, because my agent picked me up when I only had, I think I had 30,000 words. Well, I wasn't going to ditch the story then. I had to make it work. But I was working pretty much full time. It was a very difficult story to write and I am really, really slow. So yeah, it just took me a really, really long time. I think it took me probably 6 years. And then, so my agent sent it out. It sold very quickly. So I didn't really, I've been very lucky in that sense. I don't have, a hallway papered with rejection slips. She sold it quite quickly. But then we got to the point, the book was done, the cover was done, and then my editor was leaving. And I didn't realise that that's a disaster. I was very green. I had no idea. And my agent said, this is a disaster. It's really bad if your editor leaves because she's your champion. And the person coming in next, they haven't bought your book. They might not even like your book. And she actually said to me, you're going to sink without trace unless we can go with your editor to her new publisher. And I didn't even think that was possible, but a lot of negotiations went on and I basically moved completely with my lovely editor, Claire Hay, to the new publisher. And so that delayed things by about 9 months. And then the pandemic came. And so we kept having publishing dates and then moving them because we didn't want to land in a lockdown. And in the end, we did land in the third lockdown. So The Smallest Man came out into closed bookshops, which was a bit sad. So some of that was my fault for being slow and some of it was just circumstances.
So many authors have almost the opposite of that in their kind of path to their first novel, and at least writing it is a bit smoother because they've got this idea and they're just so keen to get it out as quick as they can. Whereas because that kind of 8 year span of getting The Smallest Man out was quite stressful, how much has it set you up for the last few novels just being a bit easier because you're able to deal with this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know if they ever get easier, really. What is easier is that, it's got, I had a 2-book contract. So when it came to the second one, I knew it had a home to go to. Then I got another 2-book contract. So again, with The Lost Passenger and the one that I'm writing now, firstly, someone's waiting for it. So you've got to get on and do it. And secondly, there's an editor there who wants it, who's invested in it, who's going to work with you. So in that way, it really helps with motivation because there were some days, when I would sit down and try and write a bit of The Smallest Man and I'd think, am I completely wasting my time here? Am I ever going to finish this book? If I do finish it, is anyone ever going to want it? So at least once you're in contract, you don't have that. But then on the flip side, you're writing to a deadline, which can be hard. I mean, I've always written to deadlines. I was a journalist for many years, but there's something different about a book in that you can't. So I can write a feature or a piece of packaging copy, and I can say, I'm going to start at 9 o'clock. By 12 o'clock, I'll have done this because I know how to do it. I know what the elements are. I might sit down tomorrow and say, I'm going to write such and such a scene, and I might get completely stuck, and it might take me 3 days. So it's quite, in that way, a deadline can make you quite panicked if you get stuck. So on the book I'm working on at the moment, I got stuck on 60,000 words for about a month, and that's frightening because you think, am I ever going to be able to move on? So there's that stress. And then there is also the sort of lovely stress when you've had a couple of books out and people are saying they like them, and people say, oh, I can't wait for your next one. Or even the really lovely thing, which I've had a few times, is when people say, oh, you've become an auto-buy author for me. I mean, how amazing is that? But then all the time you're thinking, well, what did they like about the other books? Have I got that in the next book without the next book being the same? So the short answer to that long rambling thing is it doesn't really get any easier. And I know people who've written, I listened to your interview with Millie Johnson earlier, and I think she's on something like 23, and she still worries that the next one might not work. So I'm afraid I don't think it does get any easier.
Have you learned anything that at least makes it appear or feel easier at moments of really big stress when it is proving rather tricky?
Yes, and again, a lesson from ABBA. So when Benny Andersson wrote his first song, not for ABBA, but in his early solo career, and it did quite well, and he thought, well, if I can write one, I can write two. And if I can write two, I can probably write 3 or 4. And I remind myself of that. When you think, I've been in this place before, I've thought a book was never going to work, and I have made it work. So that is a big thing. I think we all do that. You think, yeah, I've done it once. And my husband's always saying to me, I say, oh God, this one's never going to work. And he says, you have said that before. You said exactly that before. And that does help. That definitely helps. You have to remind yourself of that. I pretty much work sort of office hours, but I try to exercise first thing, because I always think then if I have a really bad day writing, at least there's one thing I've achieved. So then I generally get to my desk about maybe 9:30, have breakfast at my desk, and then I'll write till lunchtime. My husband works at home as well, so we have lunch together, and then I'll work all afternoon. So it's very much office hours. I don't think I could do that thing of, oh, has my muse arrived today? Or I would just never get anything done. So I have to sit at my desk, whatever happens. I have to put my phone in another room because I'm very tempted by social media. And if I have my phone in the room, I pick it up when I've written a bad sentence to sort of get away from it. And then I pick it up when I've written a good sentence to reward myself. So that makes me even slower. So the phone's in the other room. I try and do mid-afternoon. I've got an exercise bike in my office, and I'll do 20 minutes on that. So try and move a bit, because you can get very stuck sitting at your desk. And then I have 3 cats that will wander in and out. If they think I've been working for too long, they will walk across the keyboard and cause chaos. So they're a bit of entertainment kind of during the day. And yeah, it's very much a working day. Definitely. It's not kind of swanning around and consulting your muse.
But with someone that's the luxury of pretty much being a full-time writer, which is something that you've always wanted from your motivational pinboard, and that would have been traveling off on luxurious holidays and writing around the world, I would imagine. Yet you're choosing to work office hours, right, to kind of keep that muscle going. What is it that you do that is part of the luxury of almost being your own boss and being able to work whenever and wherever you like? Does any of that creep into your work day that's something that you wouldn't be able to do in a regular office?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of we are 5 minutes walk from the sea here in Brighton. So yeah, if it's a nice day, we'll, make some sandwiches and go and eat our lunch on the beach, so we can do that. And I think just being able to do what I want to in the hours that I want to. So if I do want to go for a walk, if I'm stuck, I can do that. But you're always thinking, I think writing a book, especially in the later stages when you're sort of heading up to deadline, I always think it's a bit like when you've got exams ahead of you. You feel like you shouldn't be doing anything else but revising for that exam. And it's a bit like that with books. You just want to keep going and get it done. But then it means, I finish when I want to finish. I generally don't really work weekends. So there is quite a lot of freedom. People often say to me, so for example, with The Lost Passenger, the second half or the second third being set in New York, people said, oh, did you go on a research trip to New York? There's never time. If you're working in contract, there's never time for that. And the thing is, you can find out so much without leaving your desk now that, I never really get to do that. And I do think, if you had I don't know how many authors ever get to this, but if you had the luxury of saying to your publishers, no, I'm going to have 4 years to write this novel, and then you could really read all the books you wanted to read, and you could go to the places, that would be lovely. But I think, even though I'm quite old, I'm still quite new at this career, so I'm still I want to write lots of books and get lots of books out there. So I'm not unhappy to be sitting at my desk Monday to Friday. And when the writing's going well, there's no feeling like that. That is the best thing ever.
Are you someone who thinks quite philosophically and is of the mind that, well, everything kind of happens for a reason. This came around for me at the right time. I'm perfectly suited now to be an author. Or are you almost a bit irritated that you weren't able to, that you didn't kind of do this sooner, that you weren't being a writer kind of 20 years before you did?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. So I was 57 when The Smallest Man was published. So 50 years after I wrote that book about Squirrel Nutkin. And yeah, in a way, I think if I had been doing this for 20 years, maybe I would be more established. Maybe I would be famous. Maybe I would have a ton of money. But I don't know. It might be that, if I wrote a book at 25 and it didn't do very well, I maybe wouldn't have had the resilience to keep going. I think that's probably something you develop when you're a bit older. You're a bit more, okay, I really do want to do this and I'm going to stick at it. So there's that. And then there is also just, I think it makes you do need quite a tough skin to be an author. I always liken it to basically we've signed up to being a teenager in love forever, because you are always waiting. You're waiting for a bit of praise, perhaps from your editor, perhaps from early readers. You're devastated when someone gives you the opposite of praise. And so it's kind of a roller coaster. It really is, because it's so personal writing. It's everything in that book comes out of your head. So it's you. And if you get a horrible review, that can really kind of set you back. And I think perhaps being a bit older, I've been around the block a few times. I will read a bad review and think, yeah, okay, fine. You didn't like the book. Not my problem. And I don't think I would have been like that when I was 25.
Are you aiming for a word count every day, or is it just the 9 to 5, and when it hits 5, you're done?
No, I like to get 1,000 words done if I can. But I think you can sometimes get a bit trapped. You can sometimes, you get to 900 words and you think, oh, I've only got 100 more. So you write 100 any old words. And that's not really ideal. So sometimes, probably more when I'm working or at the editing stage, rather than a word count, I will give myself a task. So it might be I need to do a certain scene, or I need to introduce a certain character. And for me, that's more productive. But probably when I'm in the early stage, when I'm the first draft, I'll try and get 1,000 words. And if a fabulous day for me would be 2,000 words, and a bad day can be a sentence. Not very often, but it can be.
How quickly does it become apparent that it's going to be a very good or very bad day?
Oh, yeah, it can change on a sixpence, actually. You can start off and you're like, oh, God, I'm dragging the words out. I don't know where this scene's going. It's all falling flat. And then you write something and you think, oh, yeah, and now they could do such and such, or oh yeah, that kind of person could come in now, and then suddenly you're on a roll. So yeah, I can't tell. I can't really tell till probably the end of the day. Sometimes really quite late on, something might come, and I think again that comes down to stickability. That comes down to staying in the seat and waiting for it to come. Even if it doesn't come today, you've still got to sit in that seat.
You mentioned that you still do a lot of copywriting for people, and you kind of started your career writing for all sorts. I mean, magazines, and then my eye is particularly interested by Waitrose pizza packaging, the EasyJet in-flight.
I still do that. Basically, if you've got anything from Waitrose in your cupboard or your fridge, it's got my words on it.
But what are you? As in, are you writing the ingredients? Are you writing this tastes? It's like a...
No, I'm writing the bit on the front that says something like a crisp hand stretched sourdough pizza base topped with rich tomato sauce, juicy mushrooms, and succulent ham. That kind of thing.
Well, so here's the question with that. What is your skill in doing that, do you think? I mean, why do you think that you are able to do it? I'm sure other writers could, but you've been doing it for a little while. What is it that you have that makes you able to do that so well, do you think?
I think, well, you have to like food for a start. You have to, and this sort of comes from journalism, you have to write to a very, very specific word length. So if there's room on the pack for 30 words, there's room on the pack for 30 words, and that's all you can write. You may even have to write, X number on one line, X number on the other line, if that's the design. And then you've got to balance that with legal requirements. So if they're not Italian tomatoes, I can't say they are, even though that might make them sound nicer. So, and everything gets checked by several different departments, and each department is coming at it from a different way. So the person who's developed the product wants me to say, make it sound nice, and it will be nice. The food science, the food technologist wants to make sure it's all legal and accurate. And then the designer wants to make sure it looks nice on the pack. So it's a big balancing act, and it's surprisingly tricky, but it's a really nice thing to balance with writing a novel, because it is creative, but you do have rules, you know exactly what you need to do, and it's quite self-contained. So I will get, let's say, 12 ready meals, and I need to do the packaging text for all of them, and then it's done. It's not going to hang around for another year. So for me, it's really nice to have that balance, and also it's really nice to be working with people who aren't in book world. It just gives you a sort of different perspective, and it's great when it comes to editing a novel and you need to cut, say, 20,000 words. I don't find that difficult at all, because I'm so used to being able to trim a word here, a word there. So I can cut 20,000 words out of a, let's say, 110,000 word book without losing a chapter, probably without losing a scene. I can just trim and nibble away. And that skills come from copywriting and journalism.
So I've got, I do want to pick up on that in just a second, but very quickly. So how long will that take you before all the other players kind of get involved in this task that you have, all the legal sides of it, whatever it is, the design? When it's like, okay, we need 30 words about a pizza, how much thought do you give that first? Do you kind of sit there and say, okay, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to do it? Are you happy to take a week over this? What's that process?
I probably wouldn't take a week over 30 words, although I know copywriters who do. I don't know. That's very much a how long is a piece of string thing, really, because sometimes the words come very easily, or sometimes you might have a concept that's there might be something very special about the product, but that's actually quite difficult to convey in 2 or 3 words. So those ones, you might take hours going backwards and forwards. And that sounds ridiculous when it's 10 or 20 words on the front of a pack. But if you've only got those words, and they might be the only words that a customer reads about that product, unless it's, a very high profile product that gets advertising, when they see that on the shelf, that tells them, do I want to buy this product or not? So they do have to work quite hard. So sometimes it can be, very, very quick, and sometimes it might take hours, and sometimes it might go backwards and forwards a lot of times. It's a weird job. It's a job that most people don't think an actual human being does.
No. You said just a second ago that because of all this, you're very able to cut words and really streamline things down without missing much. So the question then, I think, moves to, if you know all of this, if you know that you're really good at being succinct and...
Why don't I write the right number of words in the first place?
Exactly, yeah.
I don't know. I think when you're writing a novel, for quite a lot of the time, you're telling the story to yourself. So you might have scenes in there that aren't really needed. You might have character. I quite often will find when I go back over my first draft, and there might be a bit that's slow and it's not really working, and the pace is dropping. And what I'll see is I've got two scenes doing the same job. And so then I can kind of merge them together. Sometimes, particularly because at least my first two books were based on sort of real characters, although fictitious versions of them. Sometimes you put in characters from the actual story because you think they belong there. And it takes you a while to move from the factual story to your completely fictitious version and realise, no, that person might have been there at the court of Henrietta Maria, but he's not important in this story. So, yeah, I think it's just a process, really. I mean, I really envy people who can do a totally clean first draft, but I have no idea how they do it.
And because of all that background, because of just being able to kind of turn your hand to writing all these different things quite tightly, do you think you'd be able to have a pretty good stab at a book in any genre? If someone wanted you to write a crime thriller, you could do that. If they wanted you to write a young adult spy novel, maybe you could do that.
I would love to write a crime thriller, and that is in my life plan to do that at some point because I read a lot of crime. So I'm pretty sure I could write a crime thriller. I don't think I could write things like sci-fi or fantasy or romance. Sadly, I couldn't write romance. I wish I could because it's so huge. I think I could only write the kind of thing I like to read. So I don't want to write historical for my whole career. At some point, I want to write more contemporary, but I can only write the kind of things that I would enjoy reading. I don't think I could write to order something that didn't have any interest for me as a reader.
Talking about you wish you could write kind of that fantasy, romantasy thing, because that's big. How much of a thought does that play in the stories that you tell, because you come to it quite late? Like, are you thinking at all about what's big, or is that fruitless exercise because by the time you've finished it, something else will be kind of the next big thing?
Yeah, to an extent it is. You can't really go, books about, I don't know, Victorian women with elephants are big at the moment, so I'll write one of those, because you can bet your life there's already 6 people doing that. But I do think, because not to be morbid, I haven't got time to write probably 100 books. I may not have time to write 50 books. So I do want the books that I write to be successful. I want them to find a readership. I want to get another contract. So with the third book, so I had a 2-book contract for the first 2. And what I learned was from that, if you want to be reasonably big and make a living from writing, you need to not only sell in this country, you need to sell in other countries, you need to sell in translation, and ideally you want to sell in America. And I didn't get even a sniff of an American deal or a translation deal for the first 2 books. And I thought, well, why is that? Because people seem to like them. But both of them, so the first one, the background is the English Civil War. Well, lots of people in Britain don't know about the English Civil War, let alone anywhere else. So that was never going to fly abroad. And then the second one, I don't really know. I mean, it was Georgian England. That sometimes sells, sometimes doesn't. But what I was told is, yeah, it's probably too niche. So then I thought, well, okay, if you want an American deal, if you want foreign deals, you need to think about what those markets want. So I went and talked to the foreign rights people at my agency. I asked, what kind of thing is selling? What kind of thing is a definite no-no in translation? And then I went away and thought, okay, if I'm going to base it on a real life event, because people do seem to like that in historical, what does everyone know about? And that's where I got the idea for the Titanic. So people always say to me, were you really obsessed with the Titanic? I'd never even seen the film until I was halfway through the book. I remembered it from used to watch the kids program Blue Peter, and I remember them telling the story of the Titanic. We all know it, but it was really just, okay, this is something I can hang a book on that people will know about. And sure enough, I have got an American deal, and I've got my first translation deal. So it's really nice that something actually paid off for once. A plan worked.
More with Frances in just a sec. Popping up to remind you that if you like the show, if you want to support us to see more of these episodes dropping into your feed whenever we can, please do support us. There's a couple of ways. You can do that as a one-off. Just send a tip my way on our Ko-Fi page. It's one and done, and I really appreciate it. If you'd like to do it with more regularity, well, you can do that as well on our Patreon page, patreon.com/writers routine. Over there, you get merch. There is bonus content as well. And there is a chance for your book to sponsor the show. So if you've done something, if you want the world to hear about it, if you want me to shout about it, more than happy. You can sponsor the show and support us in so many other ways over at patreon.com/writers routine. Let's get back into it then with Frances Quinn talking about her new novel, The Lost Passenger. You can hear about discovering who the character is and how that's even possible when she's already decided exactly where they're headed. We talk about genre and what Frances does for research. And we get back to it talking about The Lost Passenger and where the idea crept in from.
Ideas sometimes sort of creep up on you, and sort of you get the initial idea and then other bits come. But I think I had the idea that it was going to be about the Titanic, and I think I read about some other tragedies. So I'm not absolutely certain, but I think one of them was 9/11, one of them was Grenfell, and it was talking about that they couldn't necessarily identify everybody who was there. I think at 9/11 there was somebody who was thought to be there that was never found, and that got me thinking, you know, in that situation, that emergency situation where there's chaos, if someone wanted to disappear, that would be a great opportunity to do it. And so then I worked backwards. Who is it that wants to disappear? Why does she want to disappear? And that led me back to a woman in a very unhappy marriage. And then that led me forwards to what she escapes to must be something completely different from what she's come from, and must be a challenge, and there must also be the risk that she'll get found out.
So that's all there, and I know that you have to research. So how much? And again, you mentioned right at the start that you kind of fill out these notebooks, but then never look at them again. So how much do you know about the complete story before you sit down to write the first sentence?
With this one, I knew quite a lot because I felt like I had the bones of the story from the beginning because I'd thought about it in that way. Whereas with the first two, it was the character that came to me first. And so then I had to think, who is this person and what happens to them? So with this one, I think because I had this idea, she has to start in a place, need to escape it, and have to escape to somewhere different. Then I sort of just fleshed it out, really. But I never know the whole story when I start. So I didn't really have the ending. I knew what needed to happen at the end. But for a very, very long time, I couldn't figure out how I was going to make it happen. And you just go on blindly and hope that at some point it will resolve itself. And it always does.
At what point can you feel it's starting to resolve itself? Is there some crystallizing moment where you think, oh, okay, this is what's happening? Maybe it's been brooding the whole time and you've just been made aware of it too.
Yeah, it comes out of nowhere. So at the end of The Lost Passenger, there was a confrontation that I thought was going to happen in a particular way. And for the result I needed to happen, there was no way to do it without a character acting completely out of character. And so, well, how am I going to do this? And then it suddenly came to me, and so it's weird. It can be, I might be in the shower, I might be ironing. It's when I'm distracted and not thinking about it. And then I thought, oh, she doesn't need to have the confrontation with that person. She could have it with this person. And then it all fell into place. So yeah, it kind of, and when it comes, you get an almost physical feeling of, yes, it's kind of like a clunk. Like, yeah, that works. And then you're kind of on your way. But the time before that clunk can be quite scary when you don't know if it's ever going to happen.
And with kind of your protagonist here, this is Elinor Coombes. If you say for the first two books that the character came through really strongly early on, but this you've got to kind of back work it. You know that you need someone to escape, but you don't really know anything about them. What are you asking to get to know them? How are you figuring that out?
Well, it's interesting. So for the first two characters, they were based on real people. So I had a start, and they were based on real people who, when I came across them, appealed to me. They were interesting to me. So that gives you a really good start. But this time I didn't have the character. So I was thinking, well, who is it that will be in this situation and she'll need to escape? So originally, Eleanor was going to be really quite shy, really quite timid, stuck with this hideous family who basically trapped her into this marriage because they want her father's money. And I quite liked the fact that she was shy, because I thought, well, this makes the whole situation even worse. And so I wrote the first draft and sent it to my editor, and my editor said, I just find her really annoying. She's just a sad sap. And she said, she came up with, my editor's genius. She came up with a genius line. She said, reverse the arc. So Eleanor's arc originally had been timid person becomes brave. And she said, turn it around, make her brave and feisty at the beginning, and then her situation crushes her. And as soon as she said that, I was, oh, yes, that will work. And then she won't be annoying in the beginning. So really big things can happen in the editing. I mean, my books, I think all of them so far, my first set of edits is a complete rewrite. Complete. So from the version that I send to my editor first to what ends up in the book, if there's 30,000 words the same, I'd be surprised. There's probably even less than that. Everything changes.
How easy is that to deal with then? You've spent so much time, so much, as you say, that, you know, this is your, it all comes from you. So it is you that's being judged here. How can that ever get easier when you're just like, nah, let's tear that up?
It doesn't. It really doesn't. When you first get your edits, so you know, when I send that first manuscript to my editor, I think it's all right. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sending it to her. I wouldn't send it to her if I thought it was rubbish. You know, I know that there will be changes, but I think, oh yeah, this time probably not too bad. And then her notes come back, and we always joke that they basically say change everything, and she's always right. And I know now. You know, I tell myself we're on the same side. She is trying to make this book as good as it can be, and so am I. But even so, it's really hard to not feel like someone's marked your homework and given you D- and then made to do it again. It's horrible. It's really horrible. And I think the thing that probably saves me is I do basically start off with this terrible car crash of a manuscript. Then I do a massive rewrite. And then I probably only have very small things after that. Whereas some people will do like not enough of a rewrite the first time, and then it will come back and they have to do it again, which I don't know how anyone can stand that. I'm sure it will happen to me at some point. But yeah, the quick answer is it's really hard. It's a horrible part of the process, but you just have to suck it up basically, because, you know, I've been mentoring a few people recently, and people have said, oh, you know, I would hate it if an editor tried to make me change my work. And I said, well, no editor is going to try and make your work worse. They're bringing fresh eyes to it, and it's a privilege to have that. You know, it's the thing that you don't have when you're starting off. So, yeah, you can do all these psychological tricks to tell yourself, I'm lucky and it's great, but you still want to cry.
Do you have to take a step away then? Because surely you're so close to the novel that you've written, then to be told that you need to change everything must be so hard to simply get new ideas that are similar enough that it's still a similar a plot, but different enough that you can write 60,000 more unique words.
It's really hard, and your first reaction is, I don't know any other way to tell this story. So with my second book, my editor hated the ending, and I was thinking, I haven't got another ending. I don't know how else I can tell this story. And in fact, that happened with the on a more serious level. I had to completely ditch the last 30,000 words, the whole last third of The Smallest Man, because she hated it, and come up with something completely different. And so what I do is I have a couple of days of thinking, I don't know if I can do this. And then I'm very lucky that I have probably half a dozen author friends that we will all swap work. And I can say to them, can we have a brainstorm? And they will probably have already read what I've done so far. And then we'll sort of kick ideas around and they'll say, well, what if she did this? What if that happened? And then gradually you start to realize there is always another way to tell the story. You just can't see it, as you say, when you're very close to it. So it's when you get fresher eyes on it, because your editor doesn't often tell you how to fix things. Occasionally they will, she did with Reverse the Arc, but normally they'll just tell you what's wrong and you've got to figure out how to fix it. But if you've got people you can bounce ideas off, that is really when the process kicks off, and then you think, oh, that could happen, and then, oh, that could connect to that, and oh, yeah, he could come back in there, and then you're on your way again. But the first few days are really horrible.
Let's just finish off talking about the research a touch then, because I know that it's very thoroughly researched. We're talking about class divides and what's happening over in New York and what working class people, how they would have lived, and what's happening aboard the Titanic. Does this come from a grand plan before you start writing? Do you know all the books that you need to read?
No, not at all. So I try to, before I start writing, I try to read enough to get the atmosphere of the place and the time that I'm writing about. So I kind of know, what kind of rooms the scenes would take place in and what time of day people do things. But then there are a million tiny things that come up while you're writing. And some of them you just have to research there and then because you can't move on if you don't. But some of them you can park. You can just say, I need to check how long would it take to get to Minnesota on a train in 1912. Those kind of things you can park for a little while. So, yeah, I'm researching all the time and I'm finding different things that I need to know about. But that's quite fun, really. And then what's quite nice is when you might get such a niche little thing that you can't find it in any book or any website. And so then I tend to go on Twitter, as it was, X as it is now, and I'll just say, writing a book, this is my question. Does anyone know an expert? Please retweet. And you always get the answer because the whole world's out there. So I remember one afternoon when I was writing That Bonesetter Woman, I needed to know the heroine gets given a monkey, a dead monkey basically, because she needs a skeleton to practice on. No one's killed the monkey. It's died of natural causes. I have no animal cruelty in my books. But she needs to know how to get the flesh off the bones so she can use this skeleton as a sort of anatomical model. So I went on Twitter and said, is there anyone who knows how to get the flesh off the bones of a dead monkey? Oh, my God, what a weird afternoon that was. A surprising number of people knew how to do that. I don't like to think how.
That is it for this week's Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Frances Quinn for coming on the show. The new novel is The Lost Passenger. If you want to get yourself a copy, please do so on the bookshop.org page, which you can, the link is wherever you're listening. That way, stuff goes to Frances, to this podcast, and your local independent bookshop. So it's a win-win-win. Now, if I may, and I guess this is my podcast, so I may, you might be aware that outside of the writing things, I do a lot of stuff with like kids media and kids science. I host a podcast called Fun Kids Science Weekly. And if you're in the UK, if you have a family, if you have kids, that is going on tour this summer for a summer full of science. It's a 1-hour stage show, podcast mixed with live kids science is the best way to think about it. We have like guests coming along. We'll do experiments, giving away prizes. And I'm playing at towns and cities all around the UK through summer. There's a live big stage show happening in London as well. So if you have kids, science-interested kids, I'd love to see them there. I will put a link in the episode notes as well, wherever you're listening. And I will be back next week on the podcast. You can get in touch, writersroutine.com. You could follow us on Substack and support the show at Ko-Fi and Patreon. Until next week, thank you for listening. I'll see you soon.